So at the beginning of Magid, there's a very well-known statement in the Haggadah that says, "V'chol amarbe l'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim harei ze meshubach." All who increase telling the story of the Exodus of Egypt, that's very praiseworthy, says the Haggadah. So there's a question that's asked based on a Gemara in Brachos and Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. The Gemara says a scenario where in front of Rabbi Chanina, in front of one of the great sages of the Talmud, someone got up to lead the davening and said, Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'hanorav, V'hadir, V'hazuz, V'hayarui, etc., etc. Instead of saying the traditional formula of the praise of God, this individual in front of Rabbi Chanina said a very elaborate praise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Hashem. And indeed, Rabbi Chanina let him finish, and at the end he chastised him, saying that that's not the praise of God, but rather that's a genai, rather that's some type of denigration of God. This Gemara requires its own analysis, but what it does is it does challenge the statement that we just read in the Haggadah, which is why in the Amidah, why in the Shemona Esrei, the story in the Gemara, is it not appropriate to increase one's praise of God, whereas when it comes to the praise of Hashem regarding the Exodus of Egypt, as much as you can do it is praiseworthy, says the Haggadah. So the Maharal Miprag answers that when it comes to the praise that we're giving God at the Haggadah, in the Haggadah, that's not essentially praise, but that's essentially thanksgiving. That's Hakarat Tov. I think it's a wonderful message for the Haggadah, that what we're doing, part of our experience at the Haggadah, is giving Hakarat Tov to Hashem for all that He's done for us, perhaps even dating back to us being free from Yetziat Mitzrayim. I wanted to share one other thought regarding this statement in the Haggadah. This is more of a personal approach that my family has taken, really my parents have taken, my grandparents have taken over the years. Growing up, our family didn't talk so much about the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. We didn't fulfill it in that sense. Oftentimes we would talk about what my grandparents went through, or things of that sort, in the Shoah and the Holocaust. Indeed, my grandfather, my father's father, was a Holocaust survivor, as was my grandmother. He couldn't talk, as he was a stroke victim for most of my life, but he was until he was nifter, until he passed away, he was at the Seder. And I think his very presence was perhaps the kiyum of Chol Amar V'Saper B'Tzias Mitzrayim Harei Ze Meshubach. Indeed, after my grandparents passed away, my father, perhaps even unconsciously or subconsciously, would talk about the idea of post-European, post-Holocaust, his family's experience and what that all means. I think that's a key, and I think that's a fulfillment of what it means. I think there's one other important point that relates to this, is that when my father was growing up, his father, my grandfather, would say, "I don't need Mashiach." And my father would question, and my grandfather would respond, "I already had my Mashiach," obviously referring to liberation. And my father told me a few years ago that growing up he thought his father, my grandfather, was an apikoros, was a heretic. How could you say you don't need Mashiach? When at one point, my family's mentor, my mentor, Rabbi Yehuda Kelmer, gave a drasha about everyone has their own personal Mashiach. Everyone has their own personal salvation that they're either hoping for, or perhaps even at times they've experienced. And at that point, my father went over to Rabbi Kelmer and he said, "Now you've told me that my father, now I understand what his father, my grandfather, meant when he said that he doesn't need Mashiach." I think that indeed is what it means, telling our family's story of what it means to be a liberated Jew, of what it means to be a free Jew. Some of us have post-Holocaust, some of us have post some of the Sephardic countries, post their realities of what they dealt with. But each of our families has a story, and I think that the Seder night is the time for our families to tell those stories so that we remind ourselves, and perhaps more importantly, our children know, how did we get to this point? How did we get to the Seder? What is our family's history that brought us to this point? I think in that way we're merkayim, we fulfill the statement in the Haggadah, V'chol amar b'lo saper b'tzias Mitzrayim harei ze meshubach. Good Yantif.